Brightline West promised to be the easiest rail project America had ever seen. A straight path, a ready corridor, private money, and federal backing, everything aligned for success. But now, costs have surged to $21 billion and the timeline stretches to 2029. This isn't failure, it's the untold side of progress. In this episode of Great Train Speed, we'll dive into the evolving story of Brightline West, revealing how its transformation will ripple across the region and shape the future of high-speed travel in ways few anticipated when the project first began. In a country where high-speed rail projects often collapse inside committee rooms long before ground is broken, Brightline West once looked like the exception. The logic was simple. More than 90% of the 218-mile alignment between Southern California and Las Vegas runs inside the median of Interstate 15. This meant the project could rely on existing public right-of-way instead of triggering years of eminent domain battles. Unlike Texas Central, which faced fierce resistance from rural landowners, Brightline West largely avoided property disputes. The challenge here was not land acquisition, but utility relocation and coordination with state transportation agencies. From a planning standpoint, that alone saved years. The market also looked unusually clear. The Los Angeles to Las Vegas corridor already supports nearly 50 million trips a year. On peak weekends, the drive regularly stretches beyond 4 hours, turning a simple trip into a test of patience. Engineering choices reinforce the sense of simplicity. The route avoids dense urban tunneling, threading instead through the desert with long at-grade sections and viaducts over dry washes. This design eliminates the cost and risk associated with earthquake-prone subways in Los Angeles or complex construction beneath Las Vegas resorts. Environmental approvals were secured by 2022, including wildlife mitigation such as desert tortoise crossings. Compared with tunneled alternatives, planners estimated savings of $2 to $3 billion simply by keeping the line above ground. The financial model seemed just as promising. Backed by Fortress Investment Group, Brightline positioned itself as a private developer willing to shoulder the majority of the cost. Roughly 3/4 of the project's capital was expected to come from bonds and equity rather than public appropriations. The Florida experience strengthened this narrative. Since launching in 2018, Brightlines in Florida service carried more than 10 million riders, eventually turning operations profitable and proving that passenger rail could survive outside the traditional public sector framework. From every angle, land, demand, engineering, and financing, Brightline West looked like the closest thing America had to an easy high-speed rail win. If this corridor could not be delivered efficiently, it raised an unsettling question: what project possibly could? The answer came quickly, and it was sobering. We'll break it down in the next part. And if you enjoy this kind of content, hit subscribe. It really helps our channel. The jump from a $12 billion vision to a project now estimated at over $21 billion did not come from scandal or mismanagement. It came from arithmetic. As planners refined assumptions, the real cost of building modern infrastructure in the United States came sharply into focus. The sharp rise in Brightline West's cost is not the result of a single mistake, but of early estimates meeting real-world conditions. The original 2021 budget of $12 billion left out major contingencies such as inflation reserves, signaling upgrades, and construction delays. As designs matured, these gaps became impossible to ignore. Full electrification, modern stations, and a new Las Vegas terminal pushed the total beyond $21 billion by late 2025, a pattern common in large U.S. infrastructure projects. A major driver was the late addition of contingency funding. Early bids minimized soft costs like permitting delays and design changes to maintain momentum. But after construction began in 2024, Brightline had to add reserves equal to 10 to 15% of the budget. At the same time, post-pandemic inflation raised construction wages and materials by roughly 25%, while wet winters in the Kajang Pass caused costly redesigns of drainage and earthworks. Labor competition also intensified. Data centers, EV factories, and battery plants in Nevada and California pulled from the same skilled workforce, driving wages up more than 20%. Materials followed the same trend, with steel and concrete prices surging. Taken together, Brightline's rising costs reflect a broader reality. In mid-2020s America, building major infrastructure now starts from a far higher baseline. Confronted with that reality, the company made a strategic shift that marks a new phase of maturity, and what followed surprised far more people than expected. In early 2026, Brightline announced the appointment of Nicholas Petrovich, former chief executive of Eurostar, as head of Brightline Holdings. At first glance, this might look like a routine leadership change. In practice, it represents a shift in how the entire enterprise views itself. This is no longer a startup proving a concept. Brightline West has become a $21 billion national infrastructure venture, operating on a scale that demands institutional discipline. Petrovich's role is not to replace the project's founders, but to reshape governance. By separating operations from construction, Brightline aims to protect its profitable Florida service from being financially entangled with the cost volatility of its western expansion. This mirrors a model long used in Europe, where high-speed operators isolate revenue-generating lines from capital-intensive build-outs. The insights that Nicholas brings from around the globe will strengthen our operating company as it continues to grow and expand, while Mike concentrates his focus once again on implementing an unprecedented infrastructure development, Eden said in a statement. Petrovich brings more than 2 decades of experience managing complex cross-border rail systems. Under his leadership, Eurostar expanded ridership by hundreds of percent, while navigating regulatory, labor, and infrastructure challenges across multiple countries. His background in supply chain coordination and long-term contracting aligns directly with Brightline's current needs. In the United Kingdom, similar governance reforms helped rein in cost overruns on projects like Thameslink by imposing phased audits and shared accountability between public and private partners. For Brightline West, this change introduces a more European style of project management. Expect tighter budget controls, clearer risk allocation, and earlier intervention when schedules slip. Advanced scheduling tools, including artificial intelligence-assisted workforce planning, are likely to play a greater role in reducing labor inefficiencies. These are not flashy innovations, but they matter when every percentage point of savings represents hundreds of millions of dollars. The timing is also strategic. Brightline has secured a $3 billion federal grant through the Federal Railroad Administration. Access to this funding brings heightened scrutiny, and with it, the need for governance structures that match public expectations. Petrovich's appointment sends a signal to lenders and regulators alike that Brightline understands the stakes and is prepared to operate at enterprise scale. In this light, the leadership shift is not the cause of Brightline's challenges. It is a response to them. The cost shock forced the company to grow up faster than planned, and Petrovich's arrival accelerates that process. The project is moving from entrepreneurial optimism to institutional discipline. The next question is not whether Brightline can manage complexity, but whether it can deliver on time. After all this, do you think Brightline is losing control of the project? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear what you think. A late 2029 opening date for Brightline West may sound ambitious in a country where rail timelines often stretch into decades, yet ambition does not always equal fantasy. The next 18 months will determine whether this schedule remains credible. As of early 2026, nearly all pre-construction work is complete. Geotechnical surveys, environmental approvals, and right-of-way clearances are essentially finished. Heavy civil construction is ramping up in phases, beginning with trackbed preparation in Nevada. This sequencing aligns with Siemens' rolling stock delivery schedule, which anticipates testing trains in 2028. From a project management perspective, the timeline reflects a typical 4 to 5 year build window for a dedicated high-speed corridor built largely at grade. Funding remains the largest variable. The $3 billion federal grant is secured, but additional financing must come from a mix of federal loan programs and private bonds. Fortress's track record in refinancing Brightline's Florida operations strengthens confidence that these gaps can be closed. A major financing round expected in 2026 is designed specifically to absorb recent overruns and stabilize cash flow. Crucially, Brightline West benefits from structural advantages that many U.S. rail projects lack. The line is entirely grade-separated, avoiding conflicts with freight railroads. It runs through open terrain rather than dense urban centers. These conditions reduce the number of variables that can derail a schedule. In this sense, the project's challenges are financial rather than technical. A quick comparison illustrates the difference. California's high-speed rail system spans more than 800 miles, crosses farmland and city centers, and depends on fragmented public funding. Its timeline now stretches into the 2030s for even partial service. Texas Central, by contrast, failed entirely after becoming entangled in land disputes and losing access to federal support. Brightline West occupies a middle ground, private enough to move quickly, yet supported enough to weather political shifts. None of this guarantees success. Weather delays, labor shortages, and supply disruptions remain real risks. Yet unlike many predecessors, Brightline has built buffers into its schedule and budget after experiencing its first major shock. This is what maturity looks like in infrastructure development, not perfection, but adaptation. Late 2029 is aggressive. It is also defensible. For the first time in decades, an American high-speed rail project has both the institutional framework and the financial resilience to make such a deadline plausible. While the project promises significant benefits for the region, public reaction has been far from unanimous. Many potential passengers acknowledge the advantages, yet remain skeptical about execution. Some point to America's track record, arguing that major infrastructure projects here take far longer and cost far more than in other developed countries. Others go further, predicting that the line may not be completed until well into the late 2030s, if at all. Sarcasm has also surfaced, with comments joking that the project will still be in its final stages decades from now. Meanwhile, a separate group questions the entire approach, suggesting that expanding highway lanes would be a simpler solution to congestion. Together, these reactions reveal a public that sees the promise, but doubts the delivery. After all, Brightline West began as America's most convincing case for a fast, affordable, high-speed rail success. Today, it stands as something more important. The project shows just how difficult building modern infrastructure has become in the United States, even under the best conditions. Rising costs, tougher timelines, and public skepticism are no longer exceptions. They are the new baseline. Whether Brightline ultimately succeeds or struggles, its real legacy may be this: it has forced the country to confront what it truly takes to build big again, not in theory, but in practice. Amtrak's November report paints a rosy picture. Ridership is climbing, revenue is strong, and cost recovery has risen. On the surface, it looks like America's passenger rail system is finally on track to break even. Yet, despite these impressive headline numbers, Congress continues to allocate billions in subsidies. Why? The truth lies beneath the surface. In today's episode of Great Train Speed, we'll peel back the layers of Amtrak's financial story, uncover the hidden challenges, and explore what the numbers don't reveal about the future of rail travel in the United States. Amtrak's financial performance is often heralded by the headline number, cost recovery. With Amtrak's cost recovery approaching 97%, up from nearly 93% last year, it seems the railroad is on the brink of achieving financial equilibrium. This figure indicates that Amtrak's operating revenue almost covers its operational costs. However, before we start celebrating, we need to understand what breaking even actually means in the context of Amtrak. When we talk about Amtrak covering its costs, we're only discussing operating costs for some things, like employee wages, fuel, maintenance, and day-to-day train operations. But the reality is, breaking even is not enough for long-term sustainability. Amtrak's financial future hinges not only on covering its operating costs, but also on substantial investments in infrastructure and equipment. Here's where the math gets more complex. This rising cost recovery doesn't include capital expenditures, which are the investments required to upgrade and maintain Amtrak's physical infrastructure, including tracks, bridges, stations, and perhaps most critically, its aging fleet of trains. Without factoring in depreciation or the costs for Northeast Corridor essential capital improvements, Amtrak's financial situation looks much more tenuous. Amtrak may be close to breaking even in operational terms, but that doesn't mean it can continue to operate sustainably without the Northeast Corridor investments in infrastructure and future development. So, now that we've seen how close Amtrak is to breaking even operationally, the real question is this: how sustainable is that success if infrastructure needs are left unaddressed? Can any organization truly break even when capital investment is left out of the equation? Let's explore that in the next part of the journey. And if you're finding this discussion valuable, hit the subscribe button so you don't miss any future updates from our channel. Let's follow the money and dig deeper into where Amtrak's funds come from. While ticket sales and operating revenue have seen improvements, the truth is that the vast majority of Amtrak's operating funds come from federal sources. The $2 billion in ticket revenue is certainly encouraging, but it's far from enough to cover the full operational and infrastructure costs of such a large system. In the recent Amtrak November report, Amtrak's funding was heavily supplemented by federal grants, with the Northeast Corridor alone requiring more than $2 million annually. The national network accounted for an additional $1.8 million. Together, these two sources of federal support amount to nearly $4 million in government funding. That's on top of Amtrak's ticket sales revenue. It's not just that Amtrak relies on federal funding, it's the way this funding model is structured. While Amtrak is working toward reducing its dependence on federal funds, the system's reliance on public investment remains a critical issue. Unlike airlines or freight rail, which rely on customer fares and freight charges, Amtrak is a public service. And that means it operates with a different funding model, one that depends heavily on taxpayer money. The challenge isn't Amtrak's ability to generate revenue, but the way its finances are structured. The funding model itself is flawed. The $2 billion in ticket sales doesn't cover everything. The Northeast Corridor, for example, is a cash cow for Amtrak, but its costs are so high that it's still highly dependent on federal support. It's clear that the current funding structure, which involves a patchwork of state and federal contributions, cannot meet the long-term demands of Amtrak's operations and infrastructure needs. If the goal is for Amtrak to stand on its own financially, then Congress needs to reimagine the way it supports the railroad. Amtrak isn't failing to generate revenue. It's not set up to operate like a private business, and it's not sustainable to continue funding it in the same way. The fundamental issue isn't that Amtrak is unprofitable, it's that its funding design needs a complete overhaul. When you look at Amtrak's funding model, one truth becomes clear. Not every mile of track carries the same importance. So, which part of the network is truly holding the system together? Now let's zoom in on Amtrak's most critical asset, the Northeast Corridor. The NEC is the lifeblood of Amtrak's operations, handling the majority of its ridership and revenue. While the NEC represents Amtrak's strongest financial asset, it's also the most vulnerable. The infrastructure on the Northeast is aging and in desperate need of upgrades. Much of the tracks, stations, and bridges were constructed over 100 years ago by the Pennsylvania Railroad. While the current provision continues to function at extraordinary levels of service, the underlying infrastructure is rapidly approaching the end of its useful life. Amtrak faces a significant challenge in addressing the $5 billion backlog in state of good repair projects in the region. This backlog consists of essential repairs, upgrades, and replacements that are critical for the continued viability of the system. Without this investment, all of the routes in the area could face a future of more frequent delays, cancellations, and service breakdowns. Amtrak has done its best to keep the system running, but the long-term health of the system is in serious jeopardy without major capital improvements. Furthermore, the Northeast Corridor's capacity is reaching its limits. Despite the vital role it plays in the U.S. transportation network, the infrastructure is nearing the end of its ability to handle future growth. By 2040, passenger travel on the routes is projected to increase by 45%. But with current infrastructure constraints, it will be impossible to meet this demand without a substantial expansion of capacity. The system can no longer shoulder the burden of Amtrak's operations alone. As it approaches the limits of its capacity, Amtrak must make significant investments in rehabilitation and expansion, and it will require substantial funding from Congress to make this a reality. The question we need to ask isn't whether Amtrak should receive funding. It's about what kind of funding model Amtrak needs to support the growing demand for passenger rail service in the U.S. What does Congress want from Amtrak's funding? Does it want to support national mobility? Does it want to ensure regional connectivity? Does it see rail as a tool to address climate change? Or does it view rail as a Northeast Corridor essery option for rural and underserved areas? These are the fundamental questions Congress must answer in order to design a sustainable funding model. Until these questions are addressed, Amtrak will continue to operate under an uncertain funding model, constantly in flux depending on the political winds. Without clear answers, Amtrak's future will remain unpredictable. What Amtrak needs is a sustainable funding structure that aligns with the growing demands for modern, reliable transportation infrastructure. Amtrak isn't just a business. It's part of a larger public transportation system serving the national interest. Until Congress acknowledges this and acts accordingly, Amtrak will continue to face funding challenges. Should Amtrak be funded like national infrastructure or expected to behave like a business? Do you think they can handle these funding challenges? Drop a 1 if you think they can, or a 0 if you disagree. The question isn't whether Amtrak is improving, it's whether Congress understands what kind of railroad it's actually funding. Amtrak is running better than ever before. Ridership is up, revenue is up, cost recovery is rising nearly 97%. But these numbers don't tell the whole story. While Amtrak may be close to breaking even, the reality is far more complex. The future of Amtrak depends on a complete rethinking of the funding model, one that ensures long-term sustainability. Without the Northeast Corridor essery investment in infrastructure and capital improvements, Amtrak won't be able to meet the transportation demands of the future. Congress must take a serious look at how it supports Amtrak. It's time to redesign the funding structure so that Amtrak can build a reliable, sustainable rail network that serves the needs of all Americans for the next century. The Chicago Transit Board has approved the 2026 CTA budget, and it's being called one of the most consequential in years. Funding increases sound promising, but money alone doesn't fix transit. Smart choices do. This budget pledges to improve reliability, address staffing shortages, and secure long-term stability. Still, the key question remains: how much of this investment drives real improvements, and how much just keeps the trains running? In today's Great Train Speed, we'll explore the regional network, break down the spending, and ask whether this strategy truly meets CTA's most urgent needs. In the last episode, we walked through how Chicago's 2026 transit budgets bring in record-level funding for both CTA and Metra. There's real money going into new rail cars, zero-emission trains, fleet upgrades, and infrastructure improvements. And to be clear, that investment matters. It's badly needed. But here's the problem: money by itself doesn't fix broken systems. Long-term planning is still weak, and you can see that in things like the 3-year shutdown of the aging state and Lake Station, which should have been addressed much earlier. On the regional side, Metra still struggles with connectivity. Its lines function more like separate railroads, with terminals that don't connect well. Without smarter planning and real system integration, more spending won't automatically mean better transit. And yes, they did put more money on the table for regional development, but what that funding is actually being used for, and whether it delivers real results, is what we're about to break down next. If you live in Chicago, or if you care about how rail systems in major cities really function beyond the headlines, this next series is for you. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss our deep dives into the future of Chicago's transit system. To understand why CTA's 2026 budget is such a big deal, you have to remember where the agency was just a year ago. After the pandemic, the Chicago Transit Authority, CTA, found itself staring straight at what's often called a fiscal cliff. When COVID hit, ridership collapsed almost overnight. Fare revenue, one of CTA's core funding sources, has never fully recovered. Even as offices reopened and the city came back to life, daily ridership stayed well below pre-pandemic levels. For a system built around high fixed costs, that gap was dangerous. Federal emergency aid stepped in and kept the system alive. It paid workers, kept buses and trains running, and prevented deep service cuts. But that money was never permanent. It was a bridge, not a solution. As those federal dollars began to run out, the reality became impossible to ignore. Operating costs stayed high, while revenue stayed fragile. Across the region, transit agencies were staring at a combined budget gap approaching $800 million. For CTA, the questions became existential. Do you cut service? Do you raise fares? Do you lay off workers? For the first time in decades, options that had long been considered unthinkable were suddenly very real, and once a transit system enters that downward spiral, by cuts leading to fewer riders, leading to less revenue, it's incredibly hard to reverse. Then came the turning point. In late 2025, Illinois approved a new $1.2 billion per year funding package for regional transit. One legislative decision changed the trajectory overnight. That funding allowed CTA to pass a balanced $2.23 billion operating budget for 2026 without raising fares, without cutting service, and without layoffs. That alone makes this budget historic. But it also defines its purpose. This is not a budget designed to expand the system. It's a budget designed to stabilize it. It buys time. It buys breathing room. It keeps the system standing after years of uncertainty. This budget isn't about luxury. It's about survival. What's even more critical is that CTA's 2026 budget serves as a direct response to the emergency funding gap created by the pandemic. This is the first time in years that the system will operate without major emergency federal relief, which was a lifeline that was always meant to be temporary. But this stability does not come with grand plans for new projects or flashy expansions. Instead, the focus is entirely on holding the system together and making sure that the basic level of service is running smoothly for the people who rely on it every day. So, while it's certainly a victory for the CTA to pass this balanced budget, it's also clear that CTA is playing it safe, taking the necessary steps to prevent the system from deteriorating further before considering bold moves to grow or expand. So, where is CTA putting $2.2 billion? The short answer is simple: operations first, vision later. When you break the budget down through the lens of rider experience, a clear priority order emerges. The first focus is reliability. That means running buses and trains when they're supposed to run, with enough frequency that riders don't have to plan their lives around the schedule. CTA is continuing service adjustments aimed at better aligning bus and rail schedules, improving connections, and offering more one-seat rides where possible. These changes aren't flashy, but they matter. The second focus is safety. It isn't a luxury or an afterthought. It's a necessity for the long-term success of any transit system. CTA is committing additional resources to increase the Chicago Police Department's presence on the system, ensuring that riders feel safe while traveling. But this isn't simply about enforcement. CTA is rolling out Safe Ride Ambassador models, unarmed staff trained to handle crises and de-escalate conflicts. These ambassadors will be supported by law enforcement and mental health professionals, helping create a more holistic approach to safety. If you've ridden CTA recently, you know how much cleanliness impacts your experience. A dirty or poorly maintained station can immediately make a rider feel uncomfortable or unsafe. CTA's commitment to cleanliness has been strengthened by expanding the cleaning staff and introducing new cleaning protocols. But CTA is also addressing the perception of cleanliness. The Refresh and Renew program will introduce customer-friendly improvements like landscaping, additional seating, and more station art. These may seem like small details, but they go a long way in improving the daily transit experience and making the system feel more welcoming. Another key area of focus is accessibility. CTA has long been criticized for not doing enough for riders with disabilities, but with this budget, CTA is making a concerted effort to improve accessibility. The agency will add dedicated staff to focus on this area and will expand employee training on accessibility issues. And finally, equitable transit-oriented development, ETOD. This is an important initiative for CTA as it seeks to make its services more inclusive and accessible to all residents of Chicago, regardless of ability. CTA's focus on equitable transit-oriented development, ETOD, which includes improving connections to housing and job opportunities, is also a long-term investment aimed at making the transit system more integrated with surrounding communities. To achieve this goal, the CTA is opening 2 new stations: Central on the Forest Park branch of the Blue Line and Racine on the Ashland branch of the Green Line. The addition of Central and Racine stations marks a significant step toward enhancing service reliability and expanding accessibility across the system. Central Station, located on the Blue Line, enhances service for West Side neighborhoods, easing congestion at nearby stations and improving access to downtown. This station offers a more efficient route for commuters from the western suburbs, connecting them to the city's broader transit network. On the Ashland Green Line, the Racine station serves the busy Ashland Avenue corridor, providing critical access for residents, workers, and visitors. This new station is expected to reduce congestion and improve overall transit flow, supporting the growth of both residential and commercial areas. These stations are part of CTA's broader effort to improve transit accessibility and equitable transit-oriented development, creating stronger connections to jobs, education, and services. This is where the real debate begins. There's a strong argument in favor of CTA's approach. Without safety, ridership doesn't return. Without reliability, expansion becomes meaningless. Chicago's transit system lost trust during and after the pandemic, and trust has to be rebuilt before anything else can succeed. From that perspective, fixing the foundation makes sense. A stable, clean, safe system is the prerequisite for growth, not the reward for it. From a strategic standpoint, CTA is taking a conservative approach. It's choosing stability over expansion. But is that enough? Can CTA afford to wait for the recovery before pushing forward with new projects, or will delaying growth now lead to missed opportunities later? There's also a real counter-argument. By focusing almost entirely on operations, CTA risks missing an opportunity. Structural bottlenecks remain unresolved. Regional connectivity problems are still there. Without expansion or major integration projects, there's a danger that stabilization turns into stagnation. Some critics worry about a future defined not by growth, but by a managed decline system that functions better than before, but never truly moves forward. Both perspectives have merit. CTA is choosing to fix the floor before raising the ceiling. The question is how long that choice can remain defensible. Sometimes the most important signals come from what isn't included. There's no Metra connector in this budget, no Green Line extension, no Skokie Swift extension, no bold, city-shaping rail vision project. For riders who've waited decades for expansion, that absence is frustrating. But it may also be strategic. CTA leadership is clearly prioritizing credibility, showing the system can run reliably before asking for more ambitious commitments. The risk is timing. If stability becomes the end goal rather than the starting point, momentum could fade. The city's transit future depends on whether CTA can move beyond just maintaining the status quo and aim for truly transformative growth in the coming years. CTA's $2.2 billion budget won't transform Chicago's transit system overnight, but it might finally stop the bleeding. The real test isn't whether this budget works, it's whether CTA can use this moment of stability to move from survival to ambition. And that's a conversation Chicago is only just beginning. Ask anyone why they stopped riding the CTA, and the word you'll hear first is crime. But here's the catch. If crime were truly the only culprit, every line should be collapsing at the same rate. They're not. Some routes hold steady while others falter, and that unevenness points to a deeper question. What forces are really driving riders away? Is perception more powerful than reality? Are economic shifts, service reliability, or cultural narratives shaping choices more than actual incidents? Today, Great Train Speed continues its Wednesday series on regional transit, diving into the tension between fear and fact, and exploring how crime and perception intertwine to reshape Chicago's transit system. Crime is killing the CTA. That statement has become a shorthand explanation for almost every transit problem in Chicago since the pandemic. It shows up in viral clips, neighborhood forums, and campaign talking points. It is simple, emotionally powerful, and easy to repeat. Yet, the numbers tell a more complicated story. As of October 2025, system-wide rail ridership on the Chicago Transit Authority had recovered to 78% of 2019 levels, up from 72% in 2024. Average weekday ridership reached approximately 454,300 riders, reflecting steady year-over-year growth. Preliminary data from November 2025 indicated another 2% month-over-month increase, projecting roughly 127 million annual rail trips, compared with 118 million the year before. Those numbers do not describe a system in free fall. They describe a system climbing back, unevenly but measurably. The recovery, however, is not uniform. The red line reached roughly 85% recovery, driven in part by north side demand and major trip generators such as universities and sports venues. The blue line reached 82%. Meanwhile, the green line and orange line remained closer to 65 to 70%, hampered by slow zones, service reliability issues, and weaker off-peak demand. Weekday peak ridership on some express segments approached 90% recovery, while off-peak periods hovered closer to 60%. That gap points to a major structural change: hybrid work. Fewer commuters travel daily, but those who must travel at fixed times are returning faster than discretionary riders. Station-level data reinforces this uneven picture. Loop hubs such as Clark Lake reached more than 90% of pre-pandemic ridership, while several Southside stations remained below 60%. If crime alone were the dominant force, these differences would be hard to explain. So, if crime were truly the main driver, why isn't ridership declining evenly across the system? We'll uncover the real reason in the next part of our journey. By the way, we've noticed that only 25.3% of viewers have subscribed to our channel. If you find this topic interesting, don't hesitate to hit that subscribe button so you won't miss any of our updates. Your support means the world to us. A closer look at ridership by line reveals something critical. Recovery does not align cleanly with crime geography. The red line south of downtown has recovered more slowly than its northern segments, but not dramatically worse than other lines with similar crime exposure. The green line's weaker performance spans both west and south side segments, yet crime trends on those branches have not diverged sharply from system averages. Meanwhile, the blue line, which has experienced high-profile incidents of its own, continues to outperform expectations. The brown line presents the most striking contrast. Serving dense north side neighborhoods with strong local travel demand, it has approached or even exceeded pre-pandemic ridership at times. Crime has not disappeared there. What differs is the trip purpose, service reliability, and rider confidence. This pattern suggests an important insight. Riders are not responding directly to crime rates, they are responding to perceived risk combined with available alternatives. Where trains are frequent, predictable, and embedded in daily routines, riders return despite incidents. Where service is irregular, stations feel neglected, or travel is optional, people hesitate. Crime becomes part of the story, but not the whole story. The data does not support the idea of a single, system-wide collapse driven by safety alone. It points instead to a patchwork recovery shaped by behavior, choice, and trust. This is where the debate becomes emotionally charged and where numbers collide with fear. Crime incidents are not the same thing as feeling unsafe. That distinction matters. According to data from the Chicago Police Department, total reported crimes on CTA property in 2025 declined approximately 5% from the previous year. Violent incidents fell by about 6%, and assaults dropped even more following a late 2025 security surge that added patrols and K-9 units. Citywide shootings declined sharply, and incidents near transit stations followed the same downward trend. Measured per rider, the system reached one of its lowest crime-to-ridership ratios in over a decade, with fewer than one incident per 100,000 rides. Yet rider surveys told a different story. Roughly 42% of respondents cited safety as the primary reason they were not riding more often. Overall satisfaction improved, but feelings of safety slipped slightly after a handful of high-profile incidents gained widespread attention. This is the perception gap. Statistically, the system became safer. Psychologically, it felt less controlled. Media amplification plays a major role. A single phone video can circulate for days, generating millions of views and shaping public memory far more powerfully than a spreadsheet ever could. The timeline matters. In 2023, headlines emphasized crisis. In 2024, crime trends improved, but coverage remained cautious. In 2025, mixed narratives competed: recovery on paper, anxiety online. By early 2026, federal oversight threats reignited fear, even as local data continued to show improvement. The result is a system caught between reality and reputation. The core idea becomes clear. Transit ridership is driven less by crime itself and more by whether riders believe someone is in control. If fear is driven less by crime itself and more by whether riders believe the system is under control, then the next question becomes unavoidable. What actually restores that confidence? Infrastructure improvements are visible and important. New rail cars, renovated stations, brighter lighting, and cleaner platforms all contribute to comfort, but they do not by themselves rebuild trust. What matters more is the safety policy. Visible staff presence reassures riders in real time. Consistent enforcement establishes expectations. De-escalation teams address disorder without escalating conflict. Predictable consequences signal that rules matter. Comparisons with other systems make this clear. In New York, the subway reached over 90% ridership recovery in 2025. Crime declined to its lowest level in years following a post-2022 policing surge. Fare enforcement tightened, staffing increased, and leadership communicated clearly. The message was simple: the system is managed. In the San Francisco Bay Area, BART reduced crime significantly but struggled to rebuild ridership, remaining near 55% recovery. Governance instability and funding uncertainty undermined confidence despite safety gains. Philadelphia's SEPTA followed a slower, steadier path. Crime declined gradually, ridership recovered to the low 70% range, and per-rider incident rates fell consistently. Progress was less dramatic, but credibility improved. Chicago's approach leaned more collaborative and community-focused. While well-intentioned, it lacked the visible assertiveness that reassures optional riders. The result was slower perception recovery, even as safety metrics improved. Same challenges, different outcomes. People do not need zero crime. They need confidence. The most overlooked factor in the CTA's ridership story is choice. Those who left first were not captive riders. They were riders with options: cars, remote work, ride-hailing services, flexible schedules. For many of these riders, crime became the most socially acceptable explanation for stepping away. It justified a decision that was already convenient. Once habits changed, returning required more than reassurance. It required a reason. Statements from CTA leadership reflected cautious optimism. Ridership was rising, crime was down, investments in security were expanding. At the same time, federal agencies raised concerns about management consistency, creating a public tension that reinforced doubt. Political leaders framed 2025 as a turning point, while critics argued that statistics ignored lived experience. Advocates emphasized humane enforcement and trust. Skeptics pointed to surveys showing lingering fear. All of these views coexist because they describe different riders. The strong line holds that crime did not kill CTA ridership. It permitted people to leave. As a passenger, what choices are you making? Are you deciding to leave, or do you continue relying on this system for your daily activities? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear your perspective. The CTA's real problem is not that crime exists. Crime exists in every major city, on every major transit system. The difference lies in whether riders trust the system to handle it consistently.
Forget the romantic nostalgia of train travel. 2026 is about control. Amtrak isn't dying from lack of funding. It's facing something far more dangerous: the erosion of leverage. January won't bring shutdown headlines or votes on survival, but three critical decisions loom that could permanently reshape what Amtrak is allowed to do. Expansion, reliability, and authority all hang in the balance. The year ahead may quietly determine whether Amtrak remains a national force or fades into irrelevance. On Great Train Speed, we dive into why 2026 might be the most dangerous year Amtrak has ever faced. In public debate, the future of American passenger rail is often reduced to extremes. Either rail is back, supported by record ridership and historic federal investment, or it is doomed, trapped by political dysfunction. Both narratives miss the more uncomfortable reality forming as 2026 begins. Amtrak is facing containment. Containment is harder to recognize than collapse. It does not arrive with a single vote, a dramatic funding cut, or a clear villain. Instead, it emerges from overlapping constraints that narrow options over time. Trains still run. Ridership still grows in select corridors. Press releases still announce progress. But the space in which Amtrak can expand, adapt, and shape its own future quietly shrinks. Three developments converging in early 2026 make this risk unusually acute: a proposed freight railroad megamerger, the renewed threat of a federal government shutdown, and the reauthorization of federal surface transportation law. Each operates on a different timeline. Each originates in a different political arena. Together, they form a structural box around Amtrak's growth. So if containment is forming around Amtrak as early as 2026, the next question becomes simple: where does that containment actually begin? That's where we're heading next. And before we continue, a quick reminder: most viewers watching right now aren't subscribed. If you appreciate detailed, fact-based discussions about the future of passenger rail in America, consider subscribing. It helps the channel grow and allows us to keep producing this kind of work. The most consequential threat to Amtrak's long-term flexibility is not a budget fight or a partisan dispute. It is the proposed merger between Union Pacific and Norfolk Southern. Freight railroad mergers are typically analyzed through the lens of competition, pricing, or operational efficiency. That framing misses the deeper passenger rail implications of this transaction. Today, Union Pacific and Norfolk Southern collectively host 25 of Amtrak's 44 state-supported and long-distance routes, representing 57% of the national network outside the Northeast Corridor. In 2024, those routes carried more than 11 million passengers, accounting for nearly two-thirds of all Amtrak riders beyond the NEC. This is not a marginal relationship. It is the backbone of national intercity passenger rail. What makes the merger uniquely powerful is not only its effect on today's trains, but its control over tomorrow's. Of the 69 corridors selected for development through the Federal Railroad Administration's Corridor Identification Program, 33 would operate partly or entirely on Union Pacific or Norfolk Southern trackage. Nearly half of the future passenger rail map would depend on infrastructure controlled by a single private freight operator. This changes the negotiating landscape fundamentally. Amtrak's leverage today, limited as it is, comes from dealing with multiple host railroads whose incentives and priorities vary. A merge between Union Pacific Norfolk Southern would replace that fragmented environment with a single gatekeeper. Even without overt hostility, that gatekeeper would possess effective veto power over expansion, frequency increases, and operational flexibility. Union Pacific's initial application to the Surface Transportation Board illustrates the risk clearly. When addressing passenger rail, the filing repeatedly commits to maintaining current passenger service levels. On paper, this sounds compliant. In practice, it is constraining. Maintaining current service levels means preserving the status quo. It implies no expansion beyond existing routes. It offers no commitment to additional frequencies, improved schedules, or capacity growth. It does not align with the intent of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which explicitly rejected the pre-2021 passenger rail baseline and funded expansion accordingly. This is why the merger must be understood not as a freight industry event, but as a passenger rail hostage risk. Regulatory leverage and the limits of oversight. And the Surface Transportation Board sits at the center of this decision. Its mandate is to balance competition, efficiency, and public interest. Yet the Surface Transportation Board's authority is inherently reactive. It can impose conditions. It can require mitigation. It cannot redesign the underlying power relationship created by consolidation. Political pressure, therefore, becomes a critical variable. The bipartisan letter from senators urging skepticism toward the merger reflects an understanding that oversight must occur before approval, not after. Once consolidation is complete, leverage diminishes rapidly. Even personnel decisions matter. The delayed confirmation of a new board member introduces uncertainty into the regulatory process. Under Senate rules, individual senators can place holds on nominations, creating indirect leverage over merger outcomes. For Amtrak, the danger is not that the merger would immediately degrade service. The greater risk is that it would normalize a future in which expansion depends on the consent of a single freight operator, one whose core business incentives move in a very different direction. If the merger threatens Amtrak's structural leverage, a federal government shutdown threatens its momentum. Shutdowns are often framed as temporary disruptions. In practice, for passenger rail, they function far more like delayed time bombs. A shutdown does not eliminate funding already appropriated to Amtrak. Instead, it freezes the processes that convert funding into progress. Federal grant programs halt, environmental reviews pause, permitting timelines stop, construction oversight slows or disappears. Agencies responsible for rail safety and development operate in a diminished or suspended capacity. Delays at Amtrak have compounding effects because passenger rail projects are highly time-sensitive. Missed construction windows drive up costs and force difficult trade-offs within fixed budgets. Programs like the Corridor Identification Program are especially vulnerable, since delays in planning can cascade through the entire project pipeline, turning short shutdowns into year-long setbacks. Rising costs mean fewer projects move forward, weakening national rail coverage and reinforcing skepticism about passenger rail's value. Shutdowns also erode confidence among states, private partners, and planning agencies, causing momentum to fade. At the same time, uncertainty around reauthorization of federal transportation policy threatens recent gains made under the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. While the Northeast Corridor would likely remain a priority, expansion elsewhere would become harder, with long-distance and state corridors facing increased competition and scrutiny. This outcome reflects institutional neglect rather than partisan opposition. Amtrak is most at risk when Congress disengages. Even without legislative action, policy uncertainty alone can stall investment and planning long before formal decisions are made. Do you think Amtrak can suffer these risks one at a time? Drop 1 if you think it can, or 0 if you see it differently. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. What makes early 2026 uniquely consequential is not any single event, but the alignment of these pressures. A freight merger concentrates control over host infrastructure. A government shutdown threatens to stall momentum and raise costs. A policy reauthorization risks downgrading passenger rail's national priority. Each limits Amtrak in a different dimension: leverage, time, and policy relevance. Together, they form a containment environment. Amtrak is not facing extinction. It will continue to operate trains. It will likely post ridership gains in high-performing corridors. It will announce incremental improvements, but the scope of what it can attempt will narrow. Containment is more dangerous than extinction because it normalizes decline. There is no single moment of failure. Instead, ambition adjusts downward. Expectations reset. Growth becomes optional rather than assumed. Globally, passenger rail demand is not in question. From Europe to Asia to smaller markets experimenting with new service models, interest in rail continues to grow. Even tourism-focused services signal broader public appetite for rail travel. In the United States, record ridership exists alongside structural fragility. Safety recommendations remain unimplemented. Equipment shortages disrupt commuter operations. Grant programs face political threats despite demonstrated success. Major construction projects impose temporary pain to secure long-term gains. These are not signs of a system in retreat. They are signs of a system under strain, operating at the edge of its institutional tolerance. And that's all for today's journey. Hope you enjoy it. And see you in the next journey.